Say hello to Alex Acosta. From 2005 to 2009, he was the chief federal prosecutor for Southern Florida. His job was to make sure criminals went to jail, and he was vicious about it.
Alex Acosta, I believe, is a person of complete integrity, an honorable guy.
Acosta was so good as a prosecutor that he caught the attention of former President Donald Trump.
He has a law degree from Harvard Law School, had a tremendous career.
Trump eventually nominated Acosta to be the United States Secretary of Labor in 2017.
The nominee for Secretary of the Department of Labor will be Mr. Alex Acosta.
But before he could assume his new prestigious role, Acosta had to go through an intense review process by the Senate.
Mr. Acosta, so far you've refused to answer my questions.
A deep dive into every decision throughout his career to see if he really was the man for the job. And there was one particular case that they were concerned about. A little case involving Jeffrey Epstein.
He's a friend of presidents and other high-profile lawyers arrested on new sex trafficking charges.
Awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking involving minors.
See, back in 2007, back when Epstein was first arrested and tried, even though Alex Acosta had more than enough evidence to put Epstein away for life, Acosta gave Epstein the plea deal of the century that basically let him walk free.
They gave Epstein a plea deal that excused his underage sex trafficking beyond a 6-month, basically home confinement. It was a joke. It was like no sentence at all.
But why would a tough prosecutor like Acosta do this? Well, the truth all came out when he was being interviewed for the job for Trump's labor secretary. When he was asked about the questionable plea deal, he said that he'd been ordered to stand down and back off immediately. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. He said Epstein was above his pay grade. He belonged to intelligence and was above his pay grade? What did that mean?
Constitutionally, only the president and the attorney general can order a U.S. attorney to stand down. The message can be delivered by a minion of the president or the attorney general, but it has to emanate from one of those two positions.
In 2019, when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested for the second time, everyone found out about this plea deal.
Was it the prosecutor, whoever it was that cut him the deal, literally was quoted as saying, I was told he's above my pay grade and that he was intelligence.
And people were furious that the current U.S. Labor Secretary helped America's most notorious people get away for a decade. But even so, Acosta stood by his decision. I wanted to help them, he said about dozens of Epstein's victims.
Because I know that my former colleagues, the men and women of my office, wanted to help them. I wanted to help them.
Acosta swore his whole goal was to make Epstein serve jail time.
We did what we did because we wanted to see Epstein go to jail.
But at the end of the day, his plea deal was nothing more than Epstein's ticket to freedom.
The Palm Beach State Attorney's Office was ready to let Epstein walk free. No jail time. Nothing.
The Epstein case has been dirty from the very beginning.
This is Nick Bryan. He's one of the foremost expert reporters on the Epstein case. He's the guy who first published Epstein's infamous black book on the internet. And he has a lot to expose in this video. So, the question becomes, who was powerful enough to tell Acosta to stand down? Well, if you look at the law, only the president or an attorney general can order a U.S. attorney to stand down from an investigation. And if that's the case, one has to wonder, how deep does this rabbit hole go?
There's been 4 presidential administrations that have covered up the Jeffrey Epstein case. The Bush administration has covered it up. The Obama administration has covered it up. The Trump administration has covered it up. And now Biden is covering it up. And the cover-up is pretty immaculate. In the United States, there are 535 legislators. There are 435 in the House of Representatives, and then there's 100 senators. And not one of the federal legislators has asked for an investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. When you cover up a crime, you are aiding and abetting that crime. So the American government is aiding and abetting child trafficking.
just what sort of intelligence did Epstein belong to? How was it possible for one man to be protected and supported by the entire U.S. government? Well, in this documentary, we're going to analyze all the evidence that potentially connects Epstein to the CIA and Israel's Mossad intelligence agency. Welcome to How to Get Away with It, and this is how he got away with it.
After me, they're coming after you, and I'm just standing in their way.
Epstein survivors sued his banks and got $365 million. But if they didn't sue, they would have received nothing. That's the sad truth. Whether you're screwed over by an employer or a doctor, a corporation, or a random driver, you won't get anything unless you sue them. But lawsuits are expensive, which is where this law firm called Morgan & Morgan comes in. With Morgan & Morgan, you only pay if they win your case, which means you get America's largest injury law firm fighting for you for $0 out of pocket. And they are good. Morgan & Morgan have gone up against 3M, Big Tobacco, and Big Oil, and they've recovered $15 billion for their clients. With 100 plus offices nationwide and over 800 expert lawyers in almost every practice area imaginable, Morgan & Morgan fights to give you the best shot at getting the compensation you deserve, no matter how you've been victimized. But because they get paid only if they win, they have to be selective about the cases they bring on. To find out if they can take your case, pause the video, scroll down and click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/how-to. There, you'll be able to submit your claim in 8 clicks or less without ever leaving your couch. So pause the video, scroll down, and click the link below to go to forthepeople.com/how-to to submit your case now. Thanks to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video. By the end of their investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, the Justice Department had a list of 32 underage girls that were abused at Epstein's mansion.
What happened in 2006 is that a 14-year-old told her mother and father that she had been by Jeffrey Epstein. And they brought her down to the Palm Beach Police Department. And the Palm Beach Police Department actually believed her because she was able to describe his house and actually facets of his anatomy. And they did not think that she was lying. So they investigated for about a year. Ultimately, they found 5 underage victims of Jeffrey Epstein's. And they had 20 people that corroborated. Actually, there was 12 corroborating people. And the thing is, they had 5 victims that were on record and hadn't been investigated, but they knew about 17 more. So Epstein should have been given perhaps a life sentence at that point. But the case was yanked away from the Palm Beach Police Department, and it went to a grand jury. And grand juries in Florida are almost unheard of unless it's a capital murder case. Grand juries have been infamous to corrupt because a special prosecutor is chosen and grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty. And the special prosecutor is responsible for showing the grand jurors the evidence that he deems necessary and calling the witnesses that he deems necessary. And there was a New York Supreme Court judge who said that special prosecutors and grand juries have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. So with that in mind, the Palm Beach Police Department gave all the Epstein evidence to this grand jury. What happened was Barry Kirshner, that special prosecutor, he called one victim, underage victim of Jeffrey Epstein's. And he potentially could have called 23. And he certainly should have called the 5 that the Palm Beach Police Department had records on. They called up one victim and then they skewered her credibility. And that's the thing about trafficking is these kids generally come from dysfunctional backgrounds, and then they're repeatedly molested. A lot of the kids get into drugs. I mean, that is the carrot, if they can withstand the abuse they get into. So ultimately, when these kids come forward, you're looking at very damaged individuals. And it's very easy to impeach your credibility. And that's what happened with the one victim that was called before that grand jury. It's almost like a perfect system, because you can, once these kids become unmarketable, they're just expunged, and what they become a lot of the time is drug addicts and alcoholics, and then they go about breaking laws and get in trouble with the law and thereby compromise their own credibility. So it's almost a perfect system that way, as far as keeping the perps, protecting the perps. When the grand jury didn't indict Jeffrey Epstein on a single count of child abuse, the Palm Beach Police Department, and especially the chief, Michael Ryder, went ballistic. And he went to the feds and he told the feds, you have to investigate this. That grand jury was a cover-up. And at that point, the Justice Department, the feds, had a list of 32 victims.
Anyone else would have gotten a one-way ticket to life in prison for this type of stuff, but not the mysterious Mr. Epstein.
And ultimately, what happened was they did not, the Justice Department did not prosecute Epstein. According to Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney, he was told to stand down because Epstein belonged to intelligence and it was above his pay grade. And he's been asked about that after that, and he's never recanted that. And the cover-up came from very high up, because according to our Constitution, there's only two people in government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the president, and one is the attorney general. So those orders had to emanate from one of those two. Now, they can be delivered by a minion of the president or of the attorney general, but ultimately, the orders emanate from one of those two positions.
He was given the deal of a lifetime for seemingly no reason. A deal where he was not prosecuted on a single count of child abuse. All he had to do was plead guilty to the light charges of soliciting prostitution from a minor and spend a little over a year in the Palm Beach jail. During his stay, he got a private wing, so he never had to deal with other inmates, and was even awarded work release privileges, allowing him to leave the jail 6 days a week for up to 12 hours a day. So Jeffrey Epstein's version of time served was going to jail for bed every night. The plea deal included other stipulations too, like how the stacks of evidence against Epstein for his sex crimes would be sealed. Even the victims wouldn't know that he got away with it. And the cherry on top was that it included a federal non-prosecution agreement, not just for Epstein, but for any anonymous, unnamed co-conspirators too, promising that Epstein and any co-conspirators would never be charged for the crimes in the future. Sure, he had to register as a sex offender and spend a little time in the big house, but it was nothing compared to the sentence he could have gotten, the sentence he should have gotten. It was the single craziest plea deal in modern American history. It was unprecedented. To put this into perspective, people get longer sentences for shoplifting in Florida than Epstein got for organizing a well-oiled sex trafficking machine that seemed to have a lot of other rich, powerful people involved.
So you got a guy who is trafficking underage girls. You got him nailed, dead to rights. And you give him the biggest sweetheart deal as a prosecutor anybody could ever imagine, the point where it's not even done in prosecutorial circles. Like, this isn't even attacked. Why would you ever do that?
Why? How? Regular rich people could only dream of having this type of pull with the justice system. This plea deal could have only been engineered by someone with seriously deep connections.
So what are we supposed to think? It's never been more clear. Epstein was an intelligence asset. Not only was he working for the CIA, Israeli intelligence, maybe even Russia intelligence. So is the American government allowing an asset to traffic and molest teenage girls all over the world for intelligence?
Epstein wasn't just collecting all this evidence for himself. He was probably doing it for something bigger, something like the CIA.
Stuart Kaplan's a retired FBI special agent. So Stuart, this guy's an op, right?
He was marked by our government as being a middleman. Jeffrey Epstein was a professional con man. He had access to people, money, and young girls, and our government targeted him because he was in the game of exploiting people and blackmailing people. And the government saw that as an asset.
Epstein was also meeting with Joe Biden's CIA director. He wasn't CIA director at the time. He was Barack Obama's Deputy Secretary of State. William Burns was working for John Kerry at the State Department and meeting with Jeffrey Epstein, a known pet.
I think Epstein was going back many years. What's interesting is he was a college dropout, and then he got a job at Dalton, which is a high school for very affluent pupils, or pupils that come from very affluent families. My guess on that is, I'm just extrapolating here. My guess on that is Epstein got busted, an underage girl, and he was turned at that point by intelligence. I believe that that's the case. In the book that I wrote, there were two primary pimps, and they were both in Southeast Asia at the same time during the Vietnam War. One was in Thailand with a top security clearance, and the other one was an ABC reporter. And I think that they got turned at the same time. I think they were probably busted molesting children. And because when they came back to the United States, they had incredible jobs waiting for them and incredible connections. So I believe that Epstein was probably recruited because of his predilection for underage girls. Epstein was smart and he was charming and he was duplicitous and he was devious and he was a sociopath. Those ingredients make up a great child trafficker, and Epstein had those ingredients in spades.
When you think about Epstein's case from the perspective that he might have been an intelligence operative, everything starts making a lot more sense.
And this explains the sweetheart deal back in 2006. This explains the prison cell cover-up. And this explains why all the Epstein tapes went missing.
Just look at what happened with the raid on Jeffrey's Caribbean island just a couple of days after his death.
The FBI actually did I don't remember the year, but it was recent in the last few years. They did a raid on his home. And this was in the FBI, in the logs. I mean, you can actually check this one. They did a raid on his home and they came upon tapes, okay? They came upon what we would assume would be surveillance footage. Now, we know he had the whole house mic'd up, cameraed up, the whole thing, right? Including the rooms that were specifically meant for, illicit activity. The FBI agent on the commanding, agent running the scene, reached out to Epstein's lawyers and let Epstein lawyers come and decide what was privileged and what was able to be taken.
Ghislaine had told a former friend that Epstein was a blackmail artist who had completely rigged his infamous island with cameras and microphones.
People think that his product was sex or finance, but it was silence, I'm pretty sure. The fact that he had a lipstick camera pointed at me from an art object, that he laid a table that was preposterously long and thin with a tablecloth made of an American flag to make it look like a coffin so that I would spill my coffee on the flag of my own country. I mean, the fact that he looked like a mutant Ralph Lauren with this kind of lubricious quality, and he's talking all of the science and market stuff and nothing adds up, and there's an heiress bouncing on his knee to get her boobs to jiggle to see whether it can distract. I mean, it's like one of these crazy scenes where nothing about it was normal. There was no trace of a normal world.
Jeffrey Epstein found me almost immediately. He knew exactly where I was, the location. And I knew then that I was being filmed. I was being watched 24/7. There were cameras all over the island.
Epstein himself once told a former girlfriend, "I collect people, I own people, I can damage people." Even after Epstein went down as a registered offender, he was still surrounded by the upper echelon of society. He was still going on about business as usual. These people were politicians, CEOs, public figures, people who should want nothing to do with a convicted pedo. Yet they continued to have relationships with him.
So when someone does something that doesn't make any sense, maybe it's because they don't want to be doing what they're doing. Maybe it's because someone's telling them what to do and threatening to release the tapes if they don't. Now, I could think of a few people whose actions I can't explain, but it wouldn't be fair of me to name names.
It would be appalling and it would be shocking for your viewers to suggest or to think that our government would condone that type of behavior. But again, in the interest of national security, sometimes those things may happen.
But how did a random teacher from NYC, who didn't even have a college education, end up working as a high-profile intelligence officer that could get away with anything? Well, it all might have been through the madam. Ghislaine Maxwell was Jeffrey Epstein's closest confidant, his associate, girlfriend, and partner in crime. But what many people don't know is that Jeffrey was even closer with Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell. It was Robert who actually introduced the pair. Back then, Robert was the type of rich that Jeffrey yearned to be. He was one of the wealthiest men in the UK during his prime. Robert created his fortune from nothing after starting a small publishing house that eventually became one of the biggest publishers of the time, Pergamon Press. Once he earned a steady flow of cash, he started purchasing other companies to expand his profit, buying up things like media companies and newspapers. He even bought a big chunk of the MTV television station and owned 2 UK football teams. Robert Maxwell became the king of a media empire, so much so that it catapulted him to billionaire status. As they started getting closer, it seemed like Robert's wealth was rubbing off on Epstein. Many people believe that it was actually Robert who helped Epstein start making ridiculous amounts of money in the world of the elite. But then, in 1991, tragedy struck. Robert was out at sea on his $18 million yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, near the Canary Islands when he mysteriously fell overboard to his death. A fisherman had discovered his body floating lifeless in the ocean 15 miles away from his boat. It was later discovered that $500 million was missing from the pension funds of Robert's businesses. He was using all his employees' hard-earned retirement money to fund his lifestyle. And right before he died, Robert was mere moments from financial and social collapse. It looked like a simple story of a fraudster taking his own life before it all collapsed, until it came out that there was a very high likelihood that he was working for Israel's version of the CIA, Mossad, and that maybe he was even working for Russia's version of the CIA, the KGB.
Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing some of the most powerful men in the world. I mean, all you got to do is look at his black book. And Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout from working class Coney Island. Is Jeffrey Epstein going to be able to blackmail Les Wexner, who has connections to the mafia? There's no way in hell. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein would have a very brief life expectancy if he did that. But the thing about it is, if he's got an intelligence apparatus behind him, and they make it known to whoever he's blackmailing, no one touches Jeffrey Epstein, or else pictures are going to come out. I mean, that's the only way that Jeffrey Epstein is able to blackmail.
So you think that Jeffrey Epstein had an intelligence organization behind him?
Oh, absolutely.
Or more than
no
one.
doubt about it.
The FBI spent a decade monitoring Robert to try and uncover his work as a double or even triple agent. One report called Robert a thoroughly bad character and almost certainly financed by Russia, but they couldn't nail him against the wall, at least not publicly. It wasn't just the FBI that had their suspicions about Robert being involved with intelligence. Shortly before he drowned, a self-proclaimed Mossad officer named Ari Ben Manahay was going to media outlets and telling them that Robert Maxwell had been working for Israeli intelligence for years. Ari claimed that in the mid-'80s, Maxwell told Israel about a nuclear scientist who had spilled info about the country's nuclear capabilities. The scientist was then kidnapped, brought to Israel, and held prisoner for 18 years for treason. But it didn't stop there. After Robert's death, 6 current and former members of Israeli intelligence services, the Prime Minister, and the President of Israel at the time, all showed up to his funeral. The Prime Minister, Yitzhak Shamir, even made a speech saying that Robert Maxwell had done more for Israel than can today be told. Many people believe to this day that Robert Maxwell worked for and was subsequently killed by Mossad. He's even been accused of stealing one of America's most sophisticated intelligence gathering devices for the Israeli intelligence agency. So some speculate that it was maybe the CIA that had taken him out themselves. When Robert died, it only brought Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein closer together. Soon they were publicly dating, and Ghislaine was managing a bunch of his properties for him. Yes, the properties where all the crimes went down. So, Robert Maxwell could very well be the missing link between Jeffrey Epstein and his sinister, opulent life. Maybe Jeffrey had been in on the intelligence work with Robert, and once Robert died, he took the torch?
Okay, so people speculate that it was Israeli and not American. But here's the thing about that, and I try to explain it to people. There's no way that American intelligence is going to let Israeli intelligence compromise American politicians without getting a cut of that intelligence.
But there's another key player in Epstein that no one talks about. Epstein's lawyer, the most infamous lawyer in America. When Jeffrey Epstein was being investigated for his crimes, he knew exactly who to hire as his lawyer if he wanted to get off. His good friend, Alan Dershowitz. You see, Alan Dershowitz is one of the best lawyers in America, and one of the best connected lawyers in America. And he's got a lust for winning high-profile cases with a ton of evidence against the defendant. He's even helped overturn court decisions through the appeals process. Dershowitz represented guys like O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, and most recently, former President Trump. Fast forward to 2006, and Dershowitz jumped on the opportunity to represent Jeffrey Epstein as well. Sure, it was Alex Acosta who gave the green light on Epstein's plea deal, but it was Dershowitz who outlined and negotiated the whole thing. He was the one who set everything in motion. Dershowitz did his job as a lawyer and discredited the victims. He did everything in his power to get Epstein the lightest sentence possible, and he probably even impressed himself with how successful he was. Alan Dershowitz is also really good friends with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Breaking news from Jerusalem, Israel. I spent part of the afternoon today with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not yet Prime Minister, but he has been elected.
Over and over again, Epstein got away with his crimes. But unfortunately for him, all that protection from the government started making him feel invincible. And it ultimately led to his downfall.
I think there's a couple of reasons why Epstein was ultimately arrested in 2019. I believe that he was getting too big for his britches. He was contravening things that were told him, and he thought that he had the power to circumvent someone that gave him an order. The other reason is Jeffrey Epstein was a blackmail artist, and blackmail artists have to be in the background. Once people knew that Jeffrey Epstein was a blackmail artist, articles came out about him in the Miami Herald. There's no way that he could be a blackmail artist anymore. Everybody knew what he was up to. Epstein had outlived his usefulness.
And we all know what happened then. Once Epstein died, the masses set their sights on the next best thing, Ghislaine. But too bad they would get nothing out of her.
Today, we announced charges against Ghislaine Maxwell for helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually exploit and abuse multiple minor girls. Maxwell has been taken into custody.
With Epstein gone, she was the one who was going to spill the answers that everyone had been waiting for. The world was finally going to know exactly what happened with Jeffrey Epstein and how he got away with it all.
Do you concur with the opinion that it was a suicide?
I think that's crazy. It's because I'm aware of at least 3 Epstein investigations. You got a whole bunch of women who were raped by this guy. This guy had evidence. He's got co-conspirators, and there are victims out there who want to know where the evidence has gone.
But that's not what happened. Ghislaine went through an intense month-long trial, and she was eventually convicted of you-know-what trafficking, conspiracy, and transportation of a minor for illegal sexual activity.
Maxwell found guilty on 5 of 6 counts related to sexual abuse and trafficking of underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein, her former boyfriend and longtime associate.
She was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2021, which seems like a win. But once again, no one else has been named. No other co-conspirators have been charged.
The trial of Ghislaine Maxwell was a joke. The prosecutors called 4 victims, and none of those victims had been pandered to powerful people. So they did not know the extent of Jeffrey Epstein's net worth.
They just locked her away and expected everyone to stop asking questions.
Not a single person that I can think of, have we been told, is the actual target of this blackmail.
Because if it ever came out that the CIA and US government aided and abetted child trafficking, it would kill the last shred of the people's belief in the system. To this day, the public has zero clue who Jeffrey Epstein really was. We still don't even know the most basic things about him. Like how Epstein got so rich in the first place.
Felt rich in a movie sense, which is not something that you find among actually rich people.
No one seems to know how he
got his money.
Yeah.
Well, the fucking $70 million penthouse that he had in Manhattan was given to him.
Right.
Given to him.
Yeah.
Who the gives someone a $70 million house?
We still can't even nail down a real job title for Epstein. To this day, he only ever had 2 known clients. Leslie Wexner, the questionable former CEO of the Victoria's Secret lingerie brand, and Leon Black, the billionaire co-founder of Apollo Global Management, which controls over $600 billion, and the work he did for them is vague at best. Many people believe that Epstein didn't have any money of his own, and that instead he was using his clients' money. But when you dig into his relationship with his biggest client, Les Wexner, even that starts pointing suspiciously to the CIA.
Lex Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over his multi-billion-dollar empire. I believe it was in 1992 or 93. So Jeffrey Epstein basically could do whatever he wanted with Les Wexner's money. It's very interesting. Les Wexner was hooked up with the mafia. There were elements of the Genovese crime family that transported his goods around the country. The person that he used was Walsh Trucking, Frank Walsh, and he was heavily implicated in the mafia. So when we get to the CIA, he brought Southern Air Transport, which was in Florida, and the CIA had been using that forever. Now, he brought Southern Air Transport to Ohio, and ostensibly at the Rickenbacker Air Force Base. The rationale that was given for him buying this or using this CIA proprietary airline was that it was going to be used to ship limited merchandise throughout the country. So Les Wexner is using the mafia to ship his merchandise around the country, and then he's using a CIA proprietary airline to ship his merchandise around the country. Now, that's very strange. I've read that Jeffrey Epstein was integral in getting Southern Air Transport to Ohio. People that have written about it said that Epstein was the one that ultimately did the logistics of transferring the CIA proprietary airline, Southern Air Transport, to Rickenbacker Base in Ohio. I think that that's definitely plausible. It wouldn't surprise me, and I'm leaning that way, but I just haven't seen the proof. The name of the game is compromise, or compromat, if you want to use the Russian terminology. Wexner, I believe, was already compromised. Epstein was hooked up with Wexner. Epstein was compromised himself. And then Epstein went on to become the interstate pimp that he became. But it was all done with Wexner's money.
No matter what thread in Jeffrey Epstein's life you follow, it eventually ends up back with the CIA. Even his very existence seems like a CIA construct. It's almost like he didn't even exist, like he was a made-up character.
This is not an actual human. This is a construct of someone's. Someone has created a fake human being called Jeffrey Epstein, who's a mysterious currency trading financier with crazy rules so that no one would ever invest with him. And I think that was to keep people from seeking his investment services. I mean, he's labeled disgraced financier, but nobody has a record of trading with him.
Today, Ghislaine Maxwell is serving time in a low-security prison in Florida, where inmates also get to enjoy movie nights and relaxing yoga sessions, where she's said to have become fast friends with Narcy Novak, the Florida woman serving life for orchestrating the murders of her millionaire husband and his mom. Zero effort has been made to go after Epstein's other co-conspirators, while a lot of effort has been made to keep the victims we know about from making too much noise.
David Boies, I should say David Black Cube Boies, he was integral to setting up the parameters of the victims of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. He has acted as a gatekeeper, as Jordana Feldman has too. She's the one that oversees it. Although Boies was really instrumental in setting up the parameters, it's ultimately overseen by Jordana Feldman. 225 women have come forward, and settlements have been granted to 150, 75 have been declined. 2 of those victims that have been declined were trafficked by Epstein. They're represented by esteemed therapists, or I should say they have their clients as esteemed therapists. And their therapists firmly believe that Epstein was trafficking them when they were under the age of 10. Now, they went before the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund and they were declined because they did not fall in the parameters. The government and the media have tried assiduously to say that the youngest Epstein victim was 14 years old. But there are younger victims out there of Jeffrey Epstein. And the Victims Compensation Fund has been a very good tool for the cover-up, because if you do get money from that compensation fund, you cannot sue any of your perpetrators. You make a deal that you cannot sue any of your perpetrators. So the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund is accomplishing something that the government can't. It is preventing these girls, or women now, from pursuing the various perpetrators that have abused them. The government and the media are going to continue to cover up Jeffrey Epstein and all the perpetrators and all the procurers. We know that already, but we've established an organization called EpsteinJustice.com, EpsteinJustice.com. It will serve as a vehicle for us to create a movement to take back our government, because children should not be molested with impunity, and the government should not aid and abet child trafficking. We have to, as Americans, we have to take care of this ourselves. And it's going to require a lot of mobilization, but we can do this. We do not want a government that aids and abets child trafficking.
There's a link to the Epstein Justice website in the description for those of you who want to learn more about how you can help hold the people protecting Epstein accountable.